Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is October 1st. We are officially in October, and we got a ton to get to today. We're going to start with all the surprise undefeated teams, BYU, Indiana, Pitt. I want to get to all of them and give you an idea of who I think could possibly make a little bit of a college football playoff run. There's not a ton in here that possibly could, but at the end of the day, there's definitely some very interesting teams to break down. Then we'll get to some winners and losers from Week 5. The biggest winners were by far just the college football fans, but I'll break down exactly what I mean from that. Then we'll get to a little bit of update from the Pac-12 and Mountain West. There's been a lot of different movement out there, some teams that they need to add in the next little bit, and definitely some talks ongoing. So I'll break down all of the updates there. We'll get to some questions coming out of Week 5, all of the different things, who got the biggest win. I think we all know the answer there. Also, did Colorado turn a corner this past weekend? A huge win for Dion in Colorado. Definitely could be a sign of the times coming. And then I'll get you updated on my top 12 teams in the country. This was a tough list to put together with all the movement that happened this past weekend. So, going to be an incredible show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, you can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Just click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely something I would like you guys to utilize as we go throughout the season. Want this to be as much y'all show as it is mine. So definitely utilize that if you would like to. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those, more than fine with me. But let's jump in because we have a couple of undefeated teams that we did not expect to be undefeated by any means. So I want to get to them, want to give them some flowers while I can, and get to what can they possibly do in the playoff? What are they capable of in this CFP era where a lot of teams can get in, and there can be these quote-unquote Cinderella teams that find their way into the playoff field, and there's a number that have kind of set their stake at least in the possible playoff going forward. And the first one I want to talk about is BYU. I really like this Cougars team. Now, there are definitely some holes there, and I worry about their offense's ability to score on the elite teams in the country. But at the end of the day, this is a team that I think kind of fits what I would tend to believe is the Cinderella mold of the 12-team playoff. You have veteran playmakers like Chase Roberts and Kamari Lassiter. You have so many different guys on the outside. You have Keelan Marion, another one, dynamic quarterback in Jake Retzlaff that can beat you with his arm or his leg. Veteran O-line, veteran defense, a lot of just continuity within that program. And I think that's something that, frankly, especially in the Big 12 right about now, you just don't make mistakes, you're probably in pretty good shape because there's a lot of teams over there that are making mistakes. BYU's done a great job of that, and the schedule is going to be tough. That's the part I worry about more than anything else. Coming out of the bye, they have this week, they have Arizona and then Oklahoma State, and then they head to Orlando. So it's not necessarily going to get a ton easier. Then they get Utah after another bye. So they got to go 2-2 in those games at the very least. 3-1 would obviously put them in a really good position in the Big 12. And we saw some issues last week, no doubt about it, letting Baylor back in that game. This is still a very good team. I think that Arizona and that Oklahoma State game are going to tell me pretty much all I need to know about this team. Obviously, there will still be some interesting things to happen coming forward, but those are two games that I'll be watching very closely. And if they can come out with 2 wins, then things get a little bit more interesting around the BYU Cougars. Then you got Duke, which is maybe the weirdest one of the bunch. I'll be totally honest with you, and frankly, I'm going to keep this one a little bit brief. The answer is probably no. And this is a fun team. They're doing a great job just getting out wins, but they beat Elon 26-3 to start the year. They knocked off Northwestern in overtime, who is not necessarily world beaters by any means. They beat UConn by 5, and then took care of Middle Tennessee, to be totally fair, and then had this past week where beat UNC by 1 point. This is a team that's finding a way to win, and it's not to disrespect the finding a way to win because that's obviously very, very impressive. But you got Georgia Tech this upcoming weekend, then SMU, Miami, and Virginia Tech down the road. I'm having a hard time seeing Duke being able to keep up with all of those teams. All of that being said, I think there's a world where they go 8-4 this year. If they go 8-4 in the very first year of Manny Diaz, they're off rolling, especially when your rival North Carolina is not necessarily doing what they wanted to do this year, as well as North Carolina State. So starting this with an 8-4 season would be absolutely huge for Duke, and starting 5-0 is probably what they needed to do to get there. So absolutely huge for them, regardless of if they end on a little bit of a skid. I think they're still very capable of making it 8 wins, maybe even 9 wins, if they can get one of those wins over Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech towards the end of the year. But overall, probably not a team that's going to make noise in the CFP race, but very, very interesting that they just keep finding a way to win. So maybe we'll be here in a week time and be talking about the same exact team. But moving on to Pitt, this is one of the more interesting teams in the country. I think when we talk about a lot of the things in the ACC, it's all about Clemson, it's all about Miami, and they're just up there in Pittsburgh just kind of hanging out. They're doing exactly what you'd ask them to do. Eli Holstein has been one of the best quarterbacks in the entire ACC, probably only behind Cam Ward, in my opinion. Cade Klubnik would be right up there as well, but the reality is this kid is playing really, really good football. Over 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, 2 picks, 189 on the ground, and 2 scores. He's doing everything that you want him to do, and he's doing it at a pretty young age. So this is something that you'll like to see for quite some time up there in Pittsburgh. And they do get UNC this weekend, then Cal at home before playing Syracuse. They could possibly win all 3 of those games, and then it gets really real. You have at SMU, you do get Virginia at home as a little bit of a buffer, then you get Clemson at home, at Louisville, and then at Boston College. It's going to be really hard. There's no two ways about that. But let's say they get through the next 3 games undefeated, and they're, I believe, 7-0 walking out of those games. Things could get really interesting. And then you go to SMU. Maybe that's a game that's a little bit of a toss-up as of right now, and things could get really interesting in a hurry. I think this is a team that has some juice. There's no two ways about that. They are not a team that's going to quit. We learned that against West Virginia, and there's definitely some issues on defense, but definitely a dangerous team. I don't know if they're going to make a big-time run, but there's a couple of games in the back half of that schedule that if they can just win the toss-up, so they'll be right in that conversation. Moving on to the Big Ten, we got Indiana Hoosiers doing incredible things out there in Bloomington. I think this is one of my favorite teams in the country developing right now. Curtis Rourke is slinging the rock. Elijah Surratt is an absolute dude on the outside. Kurt Cignetti coming in has just made this team really, really fun to watch. Coming over from JMU, this was not going to be an easy thing to pull off, and he's done an incredible job. He's just absolutely been one of the coaches of the year thus far, along with Mario Cristobal and another number of other guys. But it's been incredible to see what he's been able to do, and it's going to be really difficult. But the reality is, there's a world where Indiana's 9-0 going into that Michigan game towards the end of the season. They have some tough games, but at the end of the day, they have some games that they absolutely can win on this schedule. And the way that they're playing right now, especially offensively, I think they have a shot to do it. Now, they obviously got some tough ones. Northwestern this weekend makes it a little bit easier. Then Nebraska comes to them. If they can win that one, you have Washington and then Michigan State to follow it. That could put you at 9-0. Obviously, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope, some tough games in that stretch, but then you walk into that Michigan-Ohio State stretch at the end of the season. You split those, or even if you lose both of those, you're still very much in this conversation. So this is a team that, frankly, it might just be the schedule that sets up really nicely for them, and they're sitting at the end of the year being 10-2, and you're looking at an Indiana team and trying to figure out where you slide them into the playoff, and if you slide them into the playoff, which could be an interesting conversation. And then you get to Rutgers, a very, very fun team over there in Piscataway, New Jersey. They are doing really, really good stuff. And I think they're a really good football team. I think they're executing at a really high level. They're doing the things that a Greg Schiano team is really good at doing. They're running the ball, they're playing defense, and they're not making a ton of mistakes. And also, they avoid Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, and Indiana. Just kind of wanted to throw Indiana along with those top 3. That's a huge path to the playoff. There's no two ways about that. They have every chance to avoid all the big-time teams. They do have to play USC, but let's just say this is a team that is able to run the ball the same way Michigan was. Probably not to that level, but with Kyle Montague, with Sam Brown the fifth, you absolutely have a really good duo. And if you can just lean on that team, then maybe things get a little bit more interesting. This is another team that maybe just sets up really nicely for them. They have a huge game this weekend against Nebraska. Then they go to USC, play Illinois at home. So there's going to be tough games, no doubt about it, but we could look up in November and see an 8-1 or 7-2 Rutgers with a couple of huge games coming up, and that would be really fun to watch, no doubt about that. Then we got a JMU team that maybe isn't quite as big of a surprise, but I think with all the turnover that was going on over there, I think it's fair to assume they weren't going to beat UNC going into the season, and they did just that, and they kind of took them to the woodshed. So I think this is a really, really good team. I think you have Alonzo Barnett that's getting more and more comfortable in that system. Bob Chesney has done an incredible job just overhauling that roster in general. You have Omarion Dollison and Cam Ross on the outside, as well as a number of other guys. And the schedule is very doable. There's not a game that they will not be favored in. They do go to App State, which is going to be tough. Georgia State at Old Dominion are going to be interesting games, as well as Marshall. But the reality is this is the best team in this Sun Belt, and they avoid a lot of the other teams in the other division with Texas State and South Alabama. Avoiding those two teams puts you in a really good place, and then you just got to play really good football on that last Saturday to possibly get in the field. So this is a team that I very much see as a real possibility for that group of 5 spot, and I can't wait to see them go to work. I mean, they're so much fun to watch. They're elite offense, obviously, and I think they're one of those teams that we could look up at the end of the year and they're just playing elite football, have blown everyone out, and they're walking into that game with as much confidence as you possibly could as a 12 seed. And then we got UNLV, and this is a team that maybe is a little bit less surprising as well, but the reality is beating Houston, beating Kansas is not something that I had on my bingo card for UNLV, and this is a team that absolutely is going to be in that G5 conversation. They are playing such great football, and the team is better now. The offense is scarier with Haj Malik Williams at quarterback position. There are so many different things that they can do out of that offense, and frankly, Brennan Marion's got to be really happy that he has a quarterback that can sling the rock, that can do the things that he wants to do in that offense, as well as Ricky White being able to be the player that he's capable of being. So this is a really dangerous team. This is a team that absolutely can compete with just about anyone, or definitely anyone in the Mountain West, and they've proven that they can compete with a number of Power 4 teams. They have Syracuse this upcoming weekend, which is going to be very, very interesting, and definitely a game that we will break down probably tomorrow. And then they got a big one against Boise State. So we'll figure out what this team is about. Ashton Jeanty coming to town is not going to be easy to deal with, but this is absolutely a team that can do it. There's no doubt in my mind. Frankly, I think they're one of those teams that once they get into that field, whether they're the 12 seed, 11 seed, 10 seed, they can make some things happen really, really quickly. They're a dangerous offense and definitely a team that I would be watching very closely going forward. And then you got the 2 service academies. We've got to give them a little bit of a shout out here because they are absolutely rolling. And they're rolling behind 2 really elite quarterbacks. Bryson Daly has done an incredible job over there at Army, is the leading rusher right now, is running that triple option offense just to perfection as of right now. He's one of those guys that you definitely don't want to face him. I can promise you that. He can cause problems for literally any defense in the entire country. And then you got Blake Horvath on the other side, who's been absolutely remarkable. 637 through the air, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, 450 on the ground, 8 touchdowns. He's done everything. He's been their entire offense along with Bryson Daly. And this is going to be one of those things that there's a world where these two teams play for a conference title and then play each other in a regular season game the week after. It is going to be really weird to watch these teams go through the rest of the season. Now, Navy got the short end of the stick when it comes to scheduling. They have Tulane, they have USF while Army avoids them. East Carolina is going to be a huge one for Army, and then they both get Notre Dame. So that's going to be really tough for them, no doubt about that. But I can almost promise you, these are the 2 teams that no one wants to see in the playoff. No one wants to have to get prepared for a triple option offense at the very end of the year and then flip right back to your normal defense the next week. So this is one of those games that I think if they keep rolling and they keep playing good football and maybe they elevate even a little bit more, there will be some teams that are just a little bit nervous when that Army or Navy team gets to 10-0, 11-0, and things get a little bit more interesting for that. So it's going to be interesting to watch these teams. I'm still a little bit skeptical that they can get it all going and win those big-time games down the stretch of this season, but I don't know. They're one of those teams that if they find a way into the field, there's not a defense in the country that would want that assignment. I can absolutely promise you that. But definitely going to be really fun to watch these teams the rest of the way. Some interesting teams. I don't know if all of those can make that run that I'm hoping that they possibly can, but there are some group of 5 teams in there that absolutely can. And then I think Indiana is a really interesting team just because of that schedule. They have every ability to win a lot of those games and make a little bit of a run. So it will be awesome to watch those teams, but let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of breakdown of the winners and the losers from this past weekend. I think one of the biggest winners is just the future of college football at the wide receiver position. And I think you know exactly what I mean, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the undefeated teams that are a little bit of a surprise, BYU maybe being the main among them. Definitely a team that can make a little bit of a run in the Big 12. I'm a little bit skeptical of some of the things they're going to have to do down the stretch, but at the end of the day, that is a team that's playing really good football right about now. Let's get to some winners and some losers from this past weekend because it was a crazy one. One of the best weekends of the season so far, maybe the best weekend of the season so far, if depending on who you are, obviously. If you're a Georgia fan, not so much. If you're an Alabama fan, of course it was. But at the end of the day, it was an awesome week to watch, and that's why the college football fans are the biggest winners. When you get to watch a game like we watched in Tuscaloosa, Alabama this weekend, you're obviously a winner. It was absolutely incredible. Obviously, Georgia fans didn't enjoy it quite as much as everyone else, but at the end of the day, it was a huge, huge win. And I think you have a number of other ones. I mean, you talk about Kentucky going to Ole Miss and knocking off them, a huge, huge win for them. Arizona pulled an upset against Utah. We had Notre Dame, Louisville really just be all over the place, absolutely crazy. Oklahoma completed the weirdest comeback I've ever seen in my entire life. There were so many great things about this past Saturday, and I think this upcoming Saturday is a little bit leaner, but that's when they get you. That's the moment when everything goes crazy. This is what we were talking about going into that week 2 slate, and then NIU pulled the biggest upset of the entire season. So just be vigilant. This is a weekend that it wasn't hard to get up for by any means with the Alabama-Georgia one on the schedule, but this weekend definitely could be as crazy and definitely be one that we look back at the end of the season and it defines a ton of what happened. Then we got losers, and it's UGA fans' sleep schedule because they got to be up at night. The reality is losing to that team has got to be just painful at this point, and a lot for Kirby Smart as well. He's definitely losing a little bit of sleep right about now, but this has just been a nightmare in a lot of different ways for Georgia fans. I mean, you're 1-6 since Kirby has taken over against Alabama. Obviously, that one win is huge, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it's just one of those things. You see that script A on the other side, and you get a little bit nervous if you're a Georgia fan. So it's definitely one of those things that I do think they want a little bit of a rematch. I do think there are Georgia fans out there that believe that they have every ability to beat that team, and they probably could have if they didn't start so slowly. I tend to agree with that to a certain extent. I think that would be a really fun game to see again, and frankly, I'd love to see it again, no doubt about that. But the reality is the boogeyman is alive and well. It did not walk out the door with Nick Saban, and Georgia will still have to figure out how to beat that team in Crimson. And then we got the winner. The future of college football wide receiver is just beautiful in so many different ways. And we can talk about Ryan Williams. He obviously was the star of the weekend, but Jeremiah Smith did some ridiculous things this past weekend. Had 2 catches that are just outright mind-boggling, along with Ryan Williams making that catch that was mind-boggling. But these freshman wide receivers are on an entirely different level. I don't understand how they came into the college football game and are already this ready to go. And not only a couple of guys, almost all of the big-time players that came in as freshman wide receivers are playing really good football. The only guy that's a 5-star that I have not seen any headlines about is Micah Hudson over at Texas Tech, and I don't know what the situation is there. I'll leave that one alone for the time being, but Ryan Wingo is on the number 2 team in the country. He has 250 yards, 2 scores on the season, and he's not even the top 2 guys that we talk about when we talk about the freshman class. That's how good this group is. When we have Ryan Williams, when you have Jeremiah Smith, you have 2 guys that are going to be outright stars in the college football game. I'd be shocked if they weren't. They are downright incredible, and they are 2 guys that are different in a number of ways, and I love seeing kind of different styles go at it. Ryan Williams is just so complete and does incredible things with the football. And then Jeremiah Smith is one of the best athletes that I've ever seen on a football field. He's one of the best athletes I've ever seen in an Ohio State scarlet and gray. So it's going to be incredible to watch these guys the next couple of years and throughout the rest of this year, because Ryan Williams is doing things that I didn't think was possible from a 17-year-old in college football, frankly. And then that doesn't even get to the three guys over at Auburn, Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, and Malcolm Simmons, that are all doing incredible things. Or Bryant Wesco had over 100 yards on 2 catches on Saturday. He's absolutely elite player. TJ Moore over there at Clemson has played some shaky football at times, but is a good player and definitely going to develop in one. Nick Marsh up at Michigan State, and so many more that I'm probably not even thinking of right now, have been absolutely incredible to start this season. And I think we get them as this. If Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith are this as freshmen, what could they possibly be as junior? I don't even understand what is the defense that you could possibly give those kids when they're juniors, when they're seniors, because you're probably not going to be able to stop them. It's absolutely incredible to watch these kids go to work, and cannot wait to see what they can do the rest of the way. The losers were the Kalen DeBoer doubters, and frankly, a lot of these people looked a little bit stupid during the offseason, but that's a side point. I do think this is one of those things that when we talked about DeBoer getting hired at Bama, when we talked about all of the different things that went into that job, it was always about, can he recruit in the South? Does he fit that Alabama job? Does he have the ability to take over for Nick Saban and handle all of that? And more than anything, we said, in week 4, he plays UGA at home. That is the game. That is the game that he has to prove everything to all of these fans. That's the game where if he loses, then a lot of these fans might turn on him pretty quickly. And he was perfect. He was absolutely incredible. The game plan was off the charts awesome, at least in the first half. They did an incredible job of responding down the stretch, and obviously there are some things he wants to clean up from that game, but at the end of the day, he's a winner. That's who he is. He's, I believe, 106-12, if that's the right number, 108-12, something like that in his career. It's absolutely ridiculous what this guy is able to do as a head coach. Against Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, and Kirby Smart, he's 6-0. He absolutely dominates people, and obviously I'm not saying that Kalen DeBoer is the best coach in the country. Got to have a little bit of hardware to do that. But at the end of the day, this is an incredible, incredible coach, and he's answered all of the questions that you possibly could have as an Alabama fan, and frankly, he started answering those in the offseason, so it's not overly surprising to me that he was able to put it together this quickly, but this guy has it rolling, and frankly, I think a lot of people are really mad that that's the case, because Alabama doesn't seem to be going anywhere under Kalen DeBoer. UNLV's checkbook has to be feeling pretty good right about now. I'll be totally honest with you guys. Barry Odom has to be just rolling right now, because the craziness of last week kind of put a shroud over what should have been a really celebratory week going into a massive matchup this upcoming weekend. And it turned in kind of a crazy media fest. It turned into everyone talking about the program and everyone saying that Barry Odom and his coaches weren't being genuine to this kid and all of this different stuff that had nothing to do with the football game that they were about to play. And I know that got to Barry Odom just a little bit. I know that made him a little bit angry, and frankly, probably would have made me angry as well. But this is one of those things that you get into that game on Saturday, Haj Malik Williams goes to work. He did things that, frankly, Matthew Sluka did not do this entirety or the early part of this year, and he led that offense way better than it had ever been run early on in this year. So on top of all that, you get to save $100,000. So definitely helps out a little bit. Overall, none of this is to say I love the way that UNLV handled this. I definitely think there are still some things that they could have done better. But at the end of the day, you save a little bit of money and you're still very much the favorite to be that G5 team in the playoffs. So a little bit of a win-win for UNLV this week. In a crazy, crazy week, they come out on top at the end of the day. Ole Miss's window took a big-time hit this past weekend, and this is something that I really had to worry about going into this season, was how long is this team going to be title contenders? How long is this team going to be able to compete in the SEC, have the talent to compete in the SEC? Because a lot of people are walking out the door this next season. When you talk about Jackson Dart, you talk about Trey Harris, Walter Nolan, Trey Amos on the back end, there are Chris Paul Jr., all of these guys are probably walking out the door at the end of the year. And it's not to say that this is the only year that Ole Miss can make a run, because obviously something is being built out there and they can possibly get back to this level. But as of right now, when you look at the rest of this season, if they fall flat, if they lose to Georgia, if they lose to LSU, if they miss the playoff, then you're looking at this and wondering, where are they standing going forward? Who is this team going forward? Does Lane Kiffin have the job there going forward, which is a conversation for another day, but I don't want to bury Ole Miss by any means. I still think they're a very good team, and I still think they're dangerous in the college football playoff, but the red flags are very real. They have a not-so-great offensive line right about now, don't really have wide receiver 2. They have some wide receiver 2 issues, is probably the better way to put that. They have some leaks on the back end of that defense. There are things that, frankly, you had worries about coming in, and now that they faced a team that's for real, they got punched in the mouth a little bit. So it'll be interesting to watch this team the rest of the way, but there's a world where they missed the playoff this year, they're not getting back for quite some time. Then you got a winner, and I'm going to go with Drew Aller, and I know this sounds a little bit crazy because the stat line was not crazy by any means from Drew Aller this past weekend, but he proved to me that he knows exactly who he is, and he proved to me that he can run this offense however way you want him to run it. He can air the ball out and take advantage of the back end as much as times as he wants, or they can run the ball, and they can be super efficient, and they can make the plays that they need to make at the right moment. Penn State missed 2 field goals and had a turnover on downs in this game. This one could have gotten a little bit crazier. They outgained Illinois by 150 yards. Drew Aller was 15 for 21 and didn't throw a pick. So nothing was gaudy. There's no two ways about that. But these moments really matter. When you can look at your quarterback and say, we don't need you to be Superman. We don't need you to be incredible. We don't need you to throw the ball 60 yards downfield. We just need you to execute. And then he goes out and executes. That's a huge deal. That's something that Drew Aller kind of struggled to do last year when in those big-time games. They probably just needed him to execute, and they would stay in those games, and he wasn't able to. This year, it feels like he's a little bit more able. And obviously, those Ohio State and Michigan games will pose a bigger problem for him, no doubt about that. But it's been really impressive what he's been capable of doing this year, and it's not all hitting you over the head. It's not all, those big 60-yard plays, which are plenty of fun, don't get me wrong, but this guy's executing the offense, and that's the number one goal for Penn State. When you have a defense like that, you're going to have the ability to just execute the offense and get a lot of wins this season. And then Big 12 fans are a loser, and frankly, this does not apply to everyone. I fully understand that Colorado, BYU, Texas Tech, Iowa State fans have to be feeling really good right about now. But does anyone know what this conference is? Does anyone know who the real contenders are and who the pretenders are? Does anyone know who's going to be in Arlington at the end of the year? I don't know anything about this conference, and frankly, I feel like these fans feel the exact same way. I'm sure Texas Tech and BYU fans feel great right about now. The question is, how long does that last? And I don't think they know, because all of these games coming up are pretty much very, very closely packed. There are a couple of teams down at the bottom that probably won't have too much to say in this conference, but there's a lot of teams that can win it. And we'll talk about all those teams in a couple of segments, but this is a really, really crazy season over there in the Big 12 country. And frankly, I bet these fans are just a little bit confused more than anything else. I think they're trying to figure out where everything stands, who's going to go forward. And I said KSU was the best team early. I said Utah after last week. And now I'm saying Iowa State. So I imagine I'll be saying a number of other teams until the season is over. And I have to assume Big 12 fans are a little bit confused just about where they stand in that conference right about now. So a crazy week. There's no two ways about that. Well, you got a ton of winners, a ton of losers. Obviously, the big loser is Kirby Smart. The big winner is Kalen DeBoer. He won that battle and got the biggest win of the season thus far, at least in my mind. So definitely huge for those teams. And frankly, there's a lot to figure out in a number of other places. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown of the Pac-12 and Mountain West. There was a lot of news this past week. And obviously, without the show on Friday, losing my power, we now have to update you. We're going to update you now. So definitely be on the lookout for that right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from this past weekend. Was a crazy weekend. There's no two ways about that. Alabama and Kalen DeBoer the big time winners, and Georgia and Kirby Smart the big time losers from this past weekend. And obviously us as fans being big time winners for getting to watch that one. But let's get into this little Pac-12 and Mountain West battle because this one's gotten a little bit more interesting over the last little bit. And I think this is one of those things where you go back and forth. You've been battling for quite some time, and frankly, probably all could have been avoided if they just decided to merge and kind of put their ego to the side for a second, but here we are. We got to deal with all this craziness, and the Pac-12 has added a couple more teams, or at least one more team, and are looking to add a couple more, and then the Mountain West has done the exact same. They've been able to keep a couple in-house, which is absolutely huge, and definitely are looking to add a couple more, and we'll get to that here in a second, but this is where we stand right now. The Pac-12 teams, you got Oregon State, you got Washington State. They added Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, San Diego State, and then just added Utah State. That was the new addition from this past week or so from the Mountain West. Absolutely huge addition for them and definitely sets them up for a little bit of success. Obviously have to find that other team, and we'll talk about who that possibly could be here pretty soon, but at the end of the day, it's definitely one of those things that is going to get interesting in a hurry. And I think there's one of those things that it doesn't seem like they're going to merge. So they're going to keep battling for teams, and we'll see what happens. And then for the Mountain West, you do have Air Force, UNLV staying, which is absolutely huge. Then you have Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, Hawaii, who is not a full-time full-time member, which very much does matter because if you want to get to that 8 threshold in the NCAA, that would not apply to it. So technically they're at 6 full-time members. They got to get to 8, so have to add 2 teams. And definitely will be interesting to watch how they handle that. But the biggest news coming out of this is the revenue sharing for the Mountain West because it took a little bit of a different form this time. And UNLV and Air Force, part of keeping them around was giving them a bigger piece of the pie. 24.5% going to those two universities, 11.5% going to Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, and Wyoming, and then Hawaii at the bottom being the not full-time member, getting 5%. And there's a number of other things that are going to happen going forward, but at the end of the day, this is absolutely huge for the Mountain West. Keeping those teams in-house, especially UNLV, keeps you in the fight at the very least. It keeps you in the conversation, then you can figure out where you stand in a little bit. So it's going to be awesome to watch this kind of unfold, and frankly, obviously it's a little bit frustrating to watch all of this realignment stuff happen, but at the end of the day, love that Mountain West was able to kind of get through it and able to kind of handle it, and now we got to figure out where they stand going forward, and that's going to be an interesting conversation because you got a number of teams you could possibly add, and I think this Texas State team probably applies to both conferences. I think the Mountain West would absolutely love to have them. I think the Pac-12 is probably the more realistic option of the two. I think both conferences very much want to get into Texas. They want to utilize that market, and if the Pac-12 can do it, I think Texas State might be the exact right team to do it. And then you got another team over there in El Paso that would give you that same exact luxury. And it sounds like the Mountain West is getting closer and closer to possibly adding UTEP, so definitely would be something to watch going forward. But this would be huge. Everyone talks about, the football teams when we talk about realignment. The reality is you get El Paso, and that's the most important thing. You get a little bit more of a media market. I don't necessarily love the deal. I won't make any bars about that because I'd love this team to be up in the Mountain West, but at the end of the day, I understand why they're doing it and definitely would be a solid addition for this conference. And then you got a couple others that possibly the Mountain West is looking at. The Pac-12 is a little bit harder to get a beat on. There's a number of different people that could come into that conversation, but it sounds like they could be looking towards the MAC. It sounds like Toledo and Northern Illinois are the two teams that they're possibly watching. I'll be totally honest. I am on the Mountain West's side when it comes to Pac-12 versus Mountain West. If they mess with MACtion, I am going the full other direction. If they take these two teams out of the MAC, I'm going to be really, really mad, and I'm going to go fully against the Mountain West. So you're going to lose an ally if you do this Mountain West, so be careful. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to watch this all unfold. I think the Mountain West is being a little bit more proactive in adding teams. Another team to watch is Sacramento State, definitely a FCS team that would give them another media market in Sacramento. So definitely a lot of things to watch when you go into this. And I think when you talk about the Pac-12, it's kind of confusing. I think there's a number of different things that kind of play into this. Frankly, the idea that they haven't merged at this point is a little bit ridiculous, and the only reason I can find is the Pac-12 has a little bit of ego of having that logo on their chest, but at the end of the day, that's the way that this is working right now, and it sounds like they're going to move forward with not being merged. I don't like it by any means, but that's where we are right about now, and I think it adds a lot of conversation to this. There's so many different things happening around realignment. There's so many different things happening outside of the football field that a lot of people have been asking the question of, is this sport broken beyond repair? And I kind of want to get into this here for a second because obviously Matthew Sluka kind of started some of this conversation last week when he left UNLV. We've talked about transfer portal, we've talked about opt-outs, we've talked about eligibility, and now we've talked about conference realignment in the past week or 2 weeks. Very frustrating. In the middle of a football season, obviously something that we should not even be thinking about. But that's where we are right now. And this is a sentiment I've heard all over college football social media, which is just essentially, what are we to do? This sport is broken. There's nothing else to be done. It's down a river that we cannot get it back from. And I don't necessarily love that sentiment. It's not to say that this isn't problems. We have a myriad of problems that have to be fixed. I'm not necessarily going against that by any means. The reality is we also have a lot of people that are willing to possibly make the sacrifices that are needed. We have a number of people that are looking at this as a problem now. We have a number of people in media that are really speaking out about this. Even College Game Day guys are standing on that set and saying, this can't happen. We can't be sitting here in the middle of a football season and talking about a kid leaving a group of 5 possible playoff contender. That can't happen going forward, and we have to figure out a way forward. So at the end of the day, I think when you talk about this, there's so many different things to be worried about in the sport of college football, and I'm not here to tell you that there's not problems. I'm not here to tell you that the sport is more than fine. Not here to tell you any of that, because there's a number of things that have to be fixed, and they have to be fixed very, very quickly. The other thing that I can say is there's more people than there ever have been that see it as a problem. There's more people than there ever have been that see this sport and say, we have to be able to do something about this. We have to be able to help out these kids and not put them in precarious situations because this entire system is broken. We can't have a system where Bear Alexander can just leave a team halfway through the season. And if he does, there has to be some type of, I don't want to say consequences, there has to be something in place that kind of perturbs that a little bit, keeps him on the team, and makes it so we aren't looking elsewhere. We're not talking about where Bear Alexander is going to land in week 3 of the college football season. So there are issues. I'm not here to tell you that we are more than fine. I'm not here to tell you that we don't have things we have to fix coming forward. I am here to tell you that there are a number of people that know that that's the case. Kirby Smart knows that that's the case. Nick Saban knows that's the case. And you have to figure out a way to give some of these college football guys, coaches in particular, a platform. I think the next couple of weeks in college football are hugely important, not only because of the games happening on the field, unfortunately, but because of the post-game interviews. We have to hear from these coaches. We have to get these coaches to say on record that we have to do something about this. We have to get in a room and say what is best for the kids, what is best for the sport, what is best for all of us, and move forward in that direction. So Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, whoever, just say something. Give us a little bit of something to kind of get everyone going. And frankly, this sport has never been more convoluted, never more ridiculous, never more money-driven than it is right now. It's also never had more people that are willing to fix those issues. It's also never had more people that are looking at this and saying, that's a problem that has to be fixed. So I fully understand the sentiment. Don't get me wrong. I fully understand being incredibly frustrated with where this sport is right now, because I'm incredibly frustrated with where this sport is right now. What I can say is I think we're going to be okay. I think there's a number of people that are working behind the scenes to possibly take the power out of the hands of the people that possibly should be there. I absolutely will do my best on this platform to pay credence to that as much as I can. But overall, more than anything else, I understand that this sport is convoluted on the back end and has a million things that we have to figure out. If we have this, if we have that in-stadium atmosphere, if we have these kids going crazy, if we have Ryan Williams doing plays that I have never seen a wide receiver make, and we have that crowd losing its mind, we're going to be okay. If everything in that college football stadium stays the same, if we have every ability to walk into that stadium and lose ourselves in that game for 4 hours, which is exactly what happened on Saturday, we're going to be more than fine. Obviously, there are things that need to be fixed, and a lot of that is bureaucratic red tape more than anything else. But at the end of the day, the sport is still incredible. It's still special, and it's because those kids are absolutely awesome. And there's so many games that are going to be incredible week over week. And so I get it. Don't get me wrong. I fully understand the sentiment of this sport is broken. We have to do a number of different things. It might be down a river that we can't get it back from. I promise you that's not the case. I promise you there are a number of things that can be done, and frankly, saying that there's nothing to be done, saying that we're down a river, saying, throw it all away, is letting these guys off the hook, is letting all the people that run this sport, all the people that make the decision say, okay, if you're cool with it, if we're down a river, I'm not going to lift a finger. So we have to call them out. We have to say that this is a broken system. You have to do something about it. And I'll do my best over here. No two ways about that, but definitely will be something to watch in the coming weeks. We'll see how these coaches handle it, and we'll see what the Pac-12 and Mountain West do. Obviously, don't love the way that they handled this, but here we are. We'll have to figure out how we handle it going forward. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're just going to do some questions from this past weekend. I think one of the biggest ones is, are you more worried about UGA, or are you more excited about Alabama coming out of that game on Saturday night? And I'll give you my thoughts right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Mountain West and the Pac-12 and also just the health of the sport. Where do we move from here? How much things is broken? How much of it can be fixed? And we'll likely figure out over the next little bit, but I think we're going to be okay. I think the sport is more than fine. I think the Saturdays are going to be the Saturdays that have been in the past, and we'll have to figure out some things on the back end. No two ways about that, but there are plenty of people that are willing to lend a hand that haven't been in the past, and I think that's a huge difference maker here. So we'll definitely watch that coming up, and we'll obviously give you updates as it goes down. But let's get to some questions coming out of Week 5, because there's a lot of them. There's a number of things that we're going to have to break down. Might just continue this into tomorrow, honestly, but let's get into this really quickly. And the number one thing that I have is, are you more excited about what Alabama did, or are you more worried about UGA? Because there are a number of different things to pull away from this game, but frankly, both these teams played incredible football at times. Both these teams played terrible football at times on Saturday, so you're trying to figure out where you stand. And Bama put on a show. There's no doubt about that. And frankly, I would lean pretty aggressively towards excited about Bama than worried about Georgia, if I'm being totally honest. Now, there are worries about Georgia that I'll get to here in a second, but Bama just put on an absolute show. They did everything that you possibly could want them to do. Obviously, giving up that lead makes it a little bit more sketchy on the back end, but they're doing things that is just remarkable. Putting into context what Kalen DeBoer has had to do, what that staff has had to do, what those players have had to do in the past 9 months is really, really hard to contextualize, because it's incredibly hard what they've had to do, and being able to find your way to a UGA win at the end of it is just incredible. So I would be more excited about what Alabama has. Jalen Milroe's development is incredible. They have a lot of confidence in those young players, obviously, with Ryan Williams and Xavier Brown making the two biggest plays of the day. So this is a team that's absolutely incredible, and I think I would be much more excited about Bama. Now, there are some worries for Georgia. There's no two ways about that. I'm not overly worried, if I'm being totally honest. I think that back end has some things to figure out. There were some broken coverages. There were some things that just shouldn't happen on the football field with a Georgia defense. So definitely some issues, don't get me wrong, but once they got their feet under them, they got ambushed in the first quarter, and they got ambushed in the first half in general. Once they got their feet under them, they played really good football. And obviously some of that's circumstantial, some of that's the way that Bama approached the game, some of that's the way that Georgia approached the game in the second half. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be they're going to be fine. I think these are two of the best teams in the sport, and Bama just had their number on that day. So there's a number of different ways to take this. I know there are Georgia fans that say the sky is falling and everything's going crazy. I know Bama is, fully thinking that they're going to win a national title this year, and frankly, I would be right there with them right about now. So I think there's a number of different things to pull away from this, but I would be comfortably more excited about Alabama than I'm worried about Georgia right about now. Also, who had the biggest win of this past weekend? The answer is Alabama, so we'll go ahead and put them to the side. I think we all agree on that Alabama got the biggest win of the season, so we're kind of measuring everyone else against them, and I think you got to go to Kentucky next. This is a game that they very much needed just for their morale. I mean, you lose a game to South Carolina where you just look entirely inept on the offensive side of the ball. You play a Georgia team very, very close, and frankly, could have won that game possibly if you stay on that field in the fourth down. And then you get a game against Ole Miss where you don't get that 4th and 7, you're losing that game. And it would have been a devastating one to fall to 2-3 when you very easily could be 4-1. So this was a game they very much needed, and they were able to get it. And it's absolutely huge for this team. Obviously, Mark Stoops calling just a insane play, frankly, on the 4th and 7 is absolutely huge in that, and cannot wait to see what this team can do the rest of the season. I talked about him yesterday. There is not a team in the country that would not have to worry about the Kentucky Wildcats, because what they do on defense works against any offense in the country, as we saw this past weekend. And then we got UNLV. I mean, we have to talk about the Runnin' Rebels when we talk about huge wins from this past weekend. This was a tough week for this team. And I understand a lot of people rallied around Hajj Malik Williams, and they made it look incredible in the public eye, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, this had to be tough. Watching one of your players, watching your starting quarterback walk out the door, having questions about your NIL and all of this different stuff around your program that has nothing to do with football, had to make that tough. And then Hajj Malik Williams comes out and puts on an absolute show. So absolutely love to watch that kid. He's one of those guys that he's going to be special. He's going to be so much fun to watch the rest of the season, and could very well lead UNLV to a playoff, and cannot wait to see that. And then you got a couple other. I think Miami had a big win, but definitely a little bit of a lucky win. I won't doubt that. And then Penn State got a really tough win. Notre Dame kind of elevated their formula, I think. They had their formula from pretty much the beginning of the season of how they were going to play a game. They did a really good job of that on Saturday, and I think it kind of took them to the next level, especially throwing the ball. And then Kansas State got a big-time win, getting back on track, but obviously Bama takes the cake in this one. No two ways about that. Then we got Colorado. Did Colorado turn a corner this past weekend? I think this is a question that a lot of people have, and have kind of been waiting for this moment, because this was the biggest win of Deion's career at Colorado. There is no question about that. They played the most complete football I've ever seen them play. They were incredibly accurate, or they protected Shedeur Sanders for maybe the first time since he's been there. There are so many different things that they did well in this game that they just haven't done well in the past, and it's been incredible to watch this team kind of develop. So are they different? I think that's the question that everyone has. The answer is absolutely yes. There's no doubt in my mind that they're different. They're more physical at the point of attack. They play much better football on the offensive line, at least developing throughout the season. Could still be some rough areas, but at the end of the day, they are much better. They have the best player in college football in Travis Hunter, and they have a quarterback that, if you keep him upright, he's one of the best in the entire country. Shedeur Sanders is absolutely elite in every sense of the word, and he's one of those guys that I don't know if he's going to be picked number one overall. I still lean Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck over him at the end of the day, but man, if he keeps playing at this level, it's going to be really hard for NFL GMs to overlook him. So at the end of the day, Colorado absolutely has turned a corner. The question is, how long does that go on? Obviously, this is kind of a two-part question more than anything else, because the real turning of a corner, obviously in the season, they have turned a corner. I feel pretty good about that. The real turning of a corner will happen this offseason. When Shedeur Sanders walks out the door, when Travis Hunter walks out the door, and you have to find a way to continue this possible upward trend that Colorado's on, and that's going to be really tough. So there's a number of different things that play into this. Obviously, wins make it a lot easier to replace those guys you're going to have to replace at the end of the season. I would feel really good saying that they've turned a corner this season. I think we'll have to wait until the offseason to see if they're turning a corner as a program in general. But overall, incredible job by Deion Sanders, is making a very good case for Coach of the Year right about now, and one of those guys that can do really, really remarkable things in the coming years. Coming off that, how many teams can win the Big 12 title? Because this is something we talked about a little bit earlier. That conference is absolutely off the walls, and it's going to get a little bit more off the walls if I had to imagine before the end of the season. I talked about this to go into the season. I said I could probably make the case for about 8, 9, maybe even 10 teams as we head into the season. And frankly, I thought this number would probably be cut in half, maybe be cut down to at least 7 by this time. I'm still up at 8. I could probably make an argument for 9 if I really stretch myself. But BYU, Colorado, Texas Tech are the 2-0 teams out there, and they look to be the top teams in the conference as of right now. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but when you talk about how good the football they're playing, they are absolutely incredible. And then the odds lean to Kansas State, Iowa State, Utah, and I would lean a little bit more in that direction if I'm being totally honest. I think those are probably the class of the conference still, even though they've had a couple of rough weeks there. This is a conference that is just so much fun. When we went into this year, we knew it was going to be off the walls. We knew it was going to be quote-unquote America's conference, and it is delivered in every sense of the word. Cannot wait to see how the rest of this goes. but 8 teams, at least 8 teams. You could throw UCF and Arizona in those 6 teams that I just named. And then if you really wanted to get crazy, we could get a little bit more crazy with a number of other teams in there. But at the end of the day, this is what this conference was supposed to be this season, and it is delivering in every sense of the word. Cannot wait to see how this ends. And frankly, I think it's going to be a really tough battle. And Colorado is going to be a team that is probably going to have plenty to say about this conference race down the stretch. And then we had some news break yesterday that I want to get into really quickly. Are the SEC and Big Ten wrong for wanting more auto bids? And this news broke yesterday, or the day, I believe yesterday, and the SEC and the Big Ten were having conversations between athletic directors trying to figure out a possible partnership in football scheduling, as well as trying to get more auto bids in the playoff, which is something that made a lot of people mad. It sounds like they want 4 auto bids each in the playoff, and I think that would almost guarantee that they would expand to 16 teams. So a lot of things at play here, and people are obviously mad, and so am I, kind of. I'll be totally honest. I don't love this. I don't think it's better for the game in any way. I don't think it helps really much of anyone other than the Big Ten and the SEC, and frankly, they're getting a lot of help already. So I'm not necessarily super worried about those 2 entities. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me to say that they're outright wrong. It's hard for me to say that I don't understand where they're coming from, because at the end of the day, these are the 2 best conferences in the country. If you're putting in 8 teams from those 2 conferences every single year, there's a reality that those 8 teams belong in those top 16 teams every single year. So I understand this is frustrating. I don't like it by any means. I wish they would just chill out for a second and let us kind of figure out where we're standing right now. But at the end of the day, I understand where they're coming from, and also the CFP kind of can't say no. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but the other conferences, if they actually put their foot down and say, no, we're not letting you have 4 auto bids, the SEC and the Big Ten are just going to take their ball and go play elsewhere. That's the reality that we're playing with right now, and one of the other problems in this sport is that those 2 conferences hold just way too much power in those conversations. But at the end of the day, that's the reality. So there's a number of things to go into play here, but at the end of the day, what are they going to say? What can you do if you're the Mountain West, if you're the Pac-12, if you're the ACC even, to the SEC and the Big Ten? And if you say no, they might just pick up their ball and go start their own playoff. So a number of things to figure out. We'll obviously, get more information. I love the scheduling alliance. I will say that. I very much want to see these teams on the field as much as possible, but don't necessarily love the implications for the playoff by any means. Now let's move on to a little bit of a talk about the Heisman, because it's starting to take a little bit of shape. I feel like we have a very distinct top 4. I feel like we have those 4 guys that are standing above everyone else: Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, Jalen Milroe, and Cam Ward. And who's the favorite? Really depends on who you ask. I think there's a number of different arguments to be made for all of these guys. When you talk about Ashton Jeanty, he is doing things that have not been done on a college football field. He is on a record-setting pace to beat Barry Sanders' record from 1988. This kid is absolutely incredible and doing things that, frankly, I didn't even know were possible from a Boise State running back. And then you got Travis Hunter. This is the best player in the country. I feel very, very confident saying that. He does things on the football field that are just ridiculous. And we keep talking about, what is he going to be at the next level? Is he going to be a wide receiver? Is he going to be a cornerback? He keeps telling me that he might just be able to do both. I know that sounds outright insane, and maybe he can't, but is there anything that he can't do right about now? Is there any moniker that we can point and say he's not able to do that thing? Because he's able to do pretty much everything you possibly want him to do. And then you got Jalen Milroe. He has the biggest win of the season, obviously. He is someone that has played really, really good football thus far and been very efficient, taking that next step that you needed him to take if you're an Alabama fan, and they've done really, really well on this kid. I think it's one of those things that he's one of those guys that you knew had this potential. You knew had the ability, if he could incorporate his legs more often and be a little bit more dangerous in the pass game, you knew he had Heisman written all over him. Now he's found it, and it's going to be really dangerous for pretty much everyone else that plays him, because this guy is absolutely special in every sense of the word, and he's playing as elite football as he's ever played probably in his life right about now. And then you got Cam Ward. He has been the most consistent commodity in the country, in my opinion. Obviously, this past weekend was a little bit up and down, a little bit more close to those Washington State days that we became accustomed to. But at the end of the day, this kid's playing elite football. There's no 2 ways about that. I think there's so many different ways to look at this season, but if you're talking about a guy that has showed up every single week and given his team a chance to win and played really, really good football during that time, it's Cam Ward. He's been absolutely incredible, and I don't even know how I would order this, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think I would go Ashton Jeanty 1. I think he's just doing things that have not been seen on a football field. Travis Hunter 2, although it's as close as you could possibly be. And then I'll probably go Jalen Milroe 4 and Cam Ward, or Jalen Milroe 3 and Cam Ward 4. So it's really hard. It's very, very close. All these 4 players are going to be incredible to watch the rest of the season, but more than anything else, we have a running back, we have a DB/wide receiver, and we have 2 quarterbacks leading electric offenses at the very top of the Heisman race. That's special. There's no two ways about that. That's going to be incredible to watch down the stretch of the season. And I made a prediction early on not early on, but in the offseason that we would have 3 different positions represented in the Heisman finalists in New York. Sounds like that might just be the case if these guys can keep pace and give us everything that we want from this Heisman race. Cannot wait to see what happens. And frankly, we got a couple other guys that could possibly make some noise. Nico Iamaleava was off this week, but is an elite quarterback. Then you got Quinn Ewers, who has been out for the last 2 weeks. If he comes back and rolls over Oklahoma and Georgia, he'll be right back in this conversation. I can promise you that. So there are a number of guys to pull from, but at the end of the day, I would probably put Ashton Jeanty number 1 as of right now, and then Travis Hunter as close as you could possibly be as number 2. So it's going to be incredible to watch these guys go forward. Love the group that we have up top for the Heisman, and I frankly think there's going to be a couple other that possibly join them in the next little bit, and it might just get a little bit more crazy over there. But love those 2 players up at the top, Jeanty and Hunter. Just cannot wait to watch them every single week of the season. So awesome group up there. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, I'm going to break down my top 12 teams in the country. This was really hard. I'll be totally honest with you guys because, frankly, I don't know if there are 12 teams that deserve to be top 12 in the country. And I know that sounds crazy, but I'll show you exactly what I mean right after this. So stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different questions I have coming out of week 5, and now we got to get into my top 12 teams in the country, and this was really, really tough to put together. Not just because of the crazy weekend that we just had, but I don't know if there are 12 teams that deserve to be on this list, and I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but there is some craziness up at the top, and I cannot get a beat on who is the elite team, who is the not-so-elite team, and it'll be interesting to find that out the next little bit, but let's go ahead and jump in here, and USC I do have at 12. I think there's a team that I was really impressed with the win this past weekend. And I think there are worries, don't get me wrong, there are some worries with the coaching over there right about now and the handling of some of these situations. But at the end of the day, they got punched in the mouth again in the first half and responded again. And they were able to get this win this time. So I think they're really impressive. It can't be said enough how incredible DeAnton Lynn's been for this team. And I think they're doing things that I didn't really think they were capable of doing. This defense is doing incredible things, and I think they did struggle in the first half, no two ways about that, but responding is a huge part of this game, especially in the Big Ten. They have everything still in front of them. Obviously, a huge one with Penn State coming up, but this is a really good team. I think I very well could have put Ole Miss here, but didn't feel great about that after this past weekend, so I'm going to put a USC at 12 and could very well flip around a number of different ways this upcoming weekend. And then I got Michigan at 11, the team that knocked him off. Michigan's just kind of plugging along. They are not playing great football, I'll be totally honest with you, but getting those wins does matter, and they know who they are at the very least. They know exactly how they're going to go about business. It just happens to be walking an absolute tightrope. You're going to have to be able to run the ball. You're going to have to be able to play elite defense, and if someone beats you over the top a couple of times, you're probably out of that game. So there's a number of things that Michigan's going to have to figure out, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, when you're winning those games, I can't necessarily move you. So I'll roll with Michigan at 11 right now. I think another team that if they put on a performance like they did this past weekend, I'll probably drop them a little bit. Definitely a team that's worrying me a little bit, but I'll keep them right here for the time being. Missouri, I have at 10. They won because everyone else lost this past weekend. They were able to move up just a little bit in this one. I think this team has a ton of ability. I think they have every chance to be a really elite team this year, but as of right now, they're just missing the mark a little bit. They're not necessarily quite as explosive on offense, and we'll talk about that when we break down the A&M game tomorrow, but in the coming days, we'll break down that one, and it's going to be interesting to see what this team is about. I think there's a number of different things that could possibly go wrong. Even this upcoming weekend, it feels like kind of that Ole Miss game. And obviously, Missouri is more battle-tested than Ole Miss was going into that game, but a very tough defense on the other side. And if you can't get the ball down the field, it might just be a long day for Missouri and might just have their season be a little bit sketchy right about now in a week time. So it's going to be interesting to watch that team, but I'm a little bit skeptical. As of right now, they're handling business, so I won't move them, but definitely a little bit skeptical of what the Missouri Tigers can be this year. And then we got Clemson. I don't understand why Clemson is as low as they are in the AP poll. We are punishing a team for losing to Georgia in the first week of the season in Atlanta. It's absolutely insane. I think there were just a number of people that wanted certain things to be true about Clemson, and they're just kind of leaning into that right about now. So they're really impressive. They're handling business the exact way that you would expect them to, and the schedule is, I don't want to say easy, but kind of easy. Let's be totally honest. There are not a lot of games that they're really going to have to be worried about outside of Louisville and then South Carolina at the end of the year. They should be able to roll to an ACC title game. So it'll be really interesting to watch that team unfold. But as of right now, what we saw last week from Miami, what we saw the last couple of weeks from Clemson, that gap is shortening slowly in that conference. Then we got Oregon. I think this is one of those teams that's just finding it. They won 34-13 this past weekend over UCLA, handled business, and moved on forward. And that's exactly what they're going to have to do this upcoming weekend against Michigan State. And then they got the big-time one. They got Ohio State coming to town, and that's where this entire season changed. That's where this entire season changes from a kind of disappointing team that missed the mark early on in the season to a bona fide title contender, and we'll see what happens on that Saturday. I still have worries about this team. I think there are a number of things that you play an elite defensive line. Maybe that O-line looks a little bit more like it did in the first couple of weeks. Maybe you don't get the explosive plays that you need against Ohio State because that back end is so good. So there are a number of things to worry about this team, but at the end of the day, they are absolutely awesome, and they can do a number of different things this upcoming year. It's just going to come down to Ohio State in a couple of weeks. And then you got Miami, a team that is playing pretty good football, but they got away with one on Friday. Definitely a game that I don't think it was a catch. I'll be very, very clear about that. I do not think that was a catch. I do think at the end of the day they got it right. I also don't think if that's the way that we're doing business. If the way that we're doing business is the call on the field means the world, and I don't think it should be the way we're doing business, but it's the way we are, probably should have stood. That's just the reality of that situation. That being said, the team won. They kept moving forward, and it cannot be said enough what Cam Ward has done for this team. He has given this team not only some incredible quarterback, obviously, but a confidence that they're playing with that they did not have in the past couple of years. Just plain and simple. Miami was missing that Miami of it all, and Cam Ward brought that back, and it's absolutely incredible to watch them go to work, and they're still the favorite in the ACC. Obviously, as I talked about, that Clemson gap is closing just a little bit, but definitely a really, really fun team, and cannot wait to see what they can do the rest of the year. Then I got Penn State at 6. I think this is a really, really solid team, and they're starting to answer some of my questions. I had worries about this defense after that Bowling Green game, and I still kind of do. When they play those really elite offenses that can hurt you in a number of different ways, it'll be interesting to see how they respond there. But at the end of the day, they're doing a lot of really, really nice things. Drew Aller's playing the best football that he's ever played by a pretty comfortable margin. The offensive line's playing really good football. They're getting those running backs involved. It feels like this team is kind of rounding into who they're going to be this season. It feels like they're finding who they are, what their kind of cadence is on offense, and the defense is starting to fly around, which is absolutely huge for them and something that they very much need going on the rest of the year. I have Georgia at 5, and frankly, them and Tennessee I could flip as easily as I wanted. Like, I could put these teams in any which way. It's one of those things that I had to drop them, but I'm not worried about this team. I think they're going to be really, really good the rest of the season. Obviously, getting Tennessee at home is absolutely massive for this team. If Ole Miss is what we saw on Saturday, that game is not nearly as scary. And then obviously you have at Texas, which is going to be very, very tough. You could hypothetically fall in that one and still be very much in the playoff conversation. There is some talk about them being 9-3 and still being in the playoff. I have some skepticism about that. I think there are a number of teams that are just going to be crowding the top that it might be tough, but I will say, if any team in the country can be 9-3 and make it into the playoff, is Georgia. So definitely a team that I'm watching very closely. There are issues that need to be fixed, no doubt about that, but Ryan Williams drops that ball and we're having a very different conversation right now. So I'm not overly worried about this team. Obviously, some issues they need to fix on that back end, but being able to respond and take that lead is absolutely insane and something that they should at least be a little bit proud of. Not necessarily hang your hat on that by any means, but definitely something to take home with you. Then I got Tennessee at 4, and I think there's a team that just kind of handled business, and they got a really fun weekend just watching their two rivals just punch each other for 4 hours. So definitely was an incredible weekend for Tennessee, and I think this has been one of the most consistent, dominant teams in the entire country, point blank. This has been one of those teams that has played really good defense, has been explosive on offense the way that we expected them to be, and has won games a number of different ways. Absolutely blew out NC State, handled business against Oklahoma in kind of a little bit of a rock fight, and I think took their foot off the gas a little bit in that game just to get that win. So it shows me that this Tennessee team is more complete than it has been in the past. They can play elite defense, they can run the ball, they can do all of the things that kind of hampered them in the past and definitely kept them from winning those big time games. So this is an elite Tennessee team. There's no two ways about that. Obviously some huge ones coming up, and we'll figure out what this team is really about in the coming weeks, but this is a great team. They got Arkansas this upcoming weekend, Florida, then Bama. Need to go at least 2-1 in that stretch, and they very well could. And frankly, I expect them to go at least 2-1, possibly 3-0 in that stretch. Then you got Ohio State at 3, and I think this is a team that we just saw what they can do against a team with the pulse, and it's dominate them the same way they did everyone else. They're an elite team in every sense of the word. These next 2 weeks, will really tell the tale. You have Iowa, and then you have Oregon. It's going to be interesting to see how this team handles it, and obviously is kicking up quite a notch from what they did the first month of the season, but Will Howard's finding it, and that's one of those things that you saw this quarterback come in and people had questions about what he can be in this offense. The reality is he can be a lot in a Chip Kelly offense, and he can do so many dangerous things, and one of those guys that if he finds his groove, if he plays with confidence the entire year, there's not a soul in the country that is going to be able to stop this Ohio State team and be able to beat this Ohio State team for sure. I do have Texas at 2, and frankly, I could have gone either way with Alabama and Texas here, but Texas does fall a bit, has very little to do with who they are. I think the one worry that I did have from this past weekend is the run defense is a little bit porous. I think Mississippi State was able to get their feet under them. Now, there's a couple of teams on the back end of that season that could expose that, but Texas will have some time to figure this out. I don't think Oklahoma is going to be able to run the ball really effectively, and then you do have Georgia coming to town. So you'll have to figure out this stuff, no two ways about that, but not super worried about this team. I think they haven't showed a ton of holes, and I think Mississippi State, more than anything else, was just trying to make that a game. I think they were just trying to make that look good, and they did that, no two ways about that. But Texas gets the win, continues to move on, and it sounds like Quinn Ewers will be back for OU, and they can get back rolling. And this is going to be a team that if they play that the way they played against Michigan, they have every claim to a national title going on the rest of the season. Then we got Alabama, the new number 1 team in the land, and frankly, I don't think there's an argument otherwise, but let's be honest. The win this past weekend proves a lot about what this team is. This coaching staff did an incredible job. Jalen Milroe put on the absolute show, and then they got 2 freshmen to take them home, which is just ridiculous. It's incredible what this team has been able to do in such a short period of time, and there are worries, no two ways about that, mainly their ability to keep on the gas, no two ways, definitely, but at the end of the day, this is one of those teams that absolutely can win a title. They have holes on the back end that need to be fixed, and definitely something that I'm a little bit worried about going forward, but an elite team, no doubt about it, and definitely one of those teams that you could look up in the second quarter of most of these games, and they're up by 28 points, and they're pretty much just playing their backups the rest of the game. So an elite team in every sense of the word, and my new number 1 team in the country. It was really hard to put this list together, I'll be totally honest with you guys, because at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of teams that are right on that fringe. I thought about putting Ole Miss in there, but I very much worry about that team's physicality going forward. I almost put Iowa State in there because they're playing really good football, and I feel like we should give them their flowers. But at the end of the day, I just couldn't pick them over any of those teams. So it's going to be an interesting list that definitely will take shape over the next little bit as we get deeper and deeper into conference play, but definitely a hard list to put together, and I can't imagine it's going to get any easier with the way the season is going. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. We had a really fun show this time, but please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.